Next, I'd like to invite our CITW network researchers who contributed to the China Index. And in the interest of time, I'll be providing a shortened biography, but you can find the full-length biographies in the media kit. And so first we have Shahzeb Jillani. Shahzeb Jillani has spent more than 2 decades reporting to and from Pakistan from global news organizations. He is based in Karachi, where he is co-host of a leading current affairs program on Dawn News TV. He also currently leads media and journalism training workshops at the Center of Excellence in Journalism at the Institute of Business Administration in Karachi. So please welcome Shahzeb Jillani.
When I started working on this project from Pakistan, I had a sense that Pakistan will figure higher on the list, but I did not expect it will be right at the top. And that's why these kind of research activities are important, because they help quantify and give you a sense of the relationship. So I knew that Pakistan is going into a tighter embrace with China, but again, I didn't realize how tight of an embrace it is. So during the course of answering those 99 questions, I obviously became aware of many things I hadn't thought about, even though China is crucial to Pakistan now. For decades, Pakistan was in the US camp, our military cooperation, our economy. We look to the West because Pakistan is a parliamentary democracy. Our people naturally have fought for their freedoms, and that is why we draw that inspiration from the West. But as the relationship kind of started to go sour over the last 10 years, Pakistan gravitated towards China. And with the BRI, which is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in Pakistan, which is the flagship of BRI, over the last 10 years, China has invested billions and loaned billions to Pakistan, building ports, dams, coal power plants, road network. And that is why in Pakistan, the overwhelming opinion is in favor of China. Pakistanis resent the West because they feel that during the times when we were supposed to be allies of the West, we were constantly scolded publicly for being cheaters, backstabbers, betraying, taking their money, but not really performing and doing our job. And so for countries like Pakistan and many other countries that we've looked at, you always hear that beggars can't be choosers. But I think I've realized now that sometimes even beggars like to be treated with a bit of respect. And the sense in Pakistan is that that wasn't happening. With China, the relationship has been relatively stable, even before BRI, and it is growing. So when you talk about, when we are looking at, for example, how People's Republic of China may be coercing, pressurizing, dictating, that is not the experience in Pakistan, and it may be odd. I'm sure they're doing it in other countries, but in Pakistan, the public perception is, always with a lot of respect, and it's a dignified relationship. For me, this index is hugely important because it provides us a framework to assess a relationship, which is not done in Pakistan, because you're told, be grateful that China is investing, because our traditional partners call us terrorists and whatnot, but China doesn't treat us that way. But I think these questions are crucial, looking at the PRC's influence in Pakistan, because I wouldn't want to see Pakistan end up in the same place 5 years, 10 years down the road, that because of dependency, because of over-reliance on China, that we turn around and we start blaming China for bringing us to the situation. And that is why questions should be asked. So when we look at influence, the thing I like about China index is that it is trying to quantify influence, but it is not passing a judgment. If influence is growing, is it good or bad? That only a nation can answer, and their people can answer. Do they appreciate it or not? And so for me, this offers a framework, and I'm hoping that in Pakistan, people will use this, the civil society will use it, the journalists will use it to ask more questions. I already am kind of, I've started working on journalistic pieces, looking at Chinese investments, what do they mean for local people, the animosity there is in some places. So I think in that way, this is a big contribution. And I will just kind of leave it at that, and we'll be happy to answer any more questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, and up next we have Dr. Martin Thorley. Dr. Martin Thorley has a research background in the study of elites and international relations with a particular emphasis on China. And his PhD thesis explored elite relations between China and the United Kingdom during the 2000s and 10s. And his research has now broadened to the impact of capitalization, financialization of international relations. So please welcome Martin Thorley to the stage.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. So first of all, thank you to China and the World for allowing me to be part of the project. I think it's been fascinating, and hopefully that will come out in the course of my talk. So I worked with 3 local experts to complete the UK part of the index. What I'm going to do now is go into the general project, speak a little about that, and then I'm going to go into 3 elements of the UK just to explain a little and give a little bit of colour to it. In short, I think that one of the main reasons this project, this index, is useful is because increasingly, in the case of the UK, we know the what, right? We know what's happening. You look in the British media, there's increasing consciousness about it. I think this index helps in terms of the how and the why, and that's good. And it's not only in the case of the UK, that's going to be in a number of countries here. So I think this is a great idea because it addresses quite an important problem. You can look at linkages and indeed illicit, dangerous, nefarious linkages between various countries, UK and the US, for example, even with Germany, going to other regions. I think it's particularly important in terms of China because with these other examples, usually there is existing research going on. There is often a pretty strong media that looks into it. It often comes out. You see that in the case of the US, for example, the US and Europe in general. A really robust academic debate, robust discussion of history, okay? And it's not always friendly, but it's robust and it's useful. In the case of China, over the last 30 years particularly, we see transnationalization. Okay, and there's increasing linkages abroad. But when we look over toward China, it's still something of a black box. That is a problem at the center that really needs to be addressed. And that's what this project goes some distance to addressing. I think there's always a balance. One of the aspects I like about the project is that you can now compare. We can compare between countries. There are general metrics in the middle. There's a price of generalization, and to give an example, in terms of the UK, there are very specific linkages in finance, which you'll be aware of, City of London. Because the metrics have to cover a number of countries, you're going to lose a small amount of detail there. However, that's a small price to pay for a project that is a really strong net positive. Also, and I think really in its favour, it's constantly going to be refined and developed. Right, so there's a flexibility there as well, and that's one of the reasons I was really attracted to getting engaged with this. So I think it's going to be useful for researchers like me in the fact that it's a pool of data for interesting cases. It's interesting for journalists. It raises individual cases which perhaps sometimes require further investigation. It demonstrates some trends, and it also provides some useful context for stories and various pursuits that they might be looking at. Finally, I would also add that for some of the same reasons, I think it might well be useful to policymakers too. Okay, let me delve into the UK specifically. You have the spider map here. You can get an idea, a sense of it. I'm just going to talk very briefly indeed about 3 points, and then you can come back to me afterwards if you wish. So the local level engagement was a slightly bigger feature than we anticipated. If we look at the metrics here, I think that comes through in the domestic politics results. Extrapolating from those results, which is what many of you will probably want to do when you look at the data here, we felt that there was, to some degree, that comes down to the David Cameron, George Osborne push. Now, what's a good example here of what comes up in the data that might be useful for many of us is that a lot of the result of that push was at national level, and some of that is being dealt with now. If you look at the UK and you see the scene, what this suggests is that there was also encouragement at local level, which we know, but while there's been pushback or pullback on the national level, that architecture is still there at local level. Now, that's a really fascinating point. It's going to be something that perhaps we need to go into in more detail, but just to have that there as a little flag is useful. But also, just to add on that, I think that's an area where we're going to have some usefulness in terms of the next incarnation, because when we start having this over 2 and then 3 and then 4, and we can compare year by year, we can start to look if there are trends, and that's also going to be something that's extremely useful and probably going to be quite interesting as well. Moving quickly on, academia. So it's not really a huge surprise that there are strong links there and strong influence exposure in terms of academia, but it is useful in terms of providing the data and in terms of comparison. Now, though it demonstrates significant exposure, I think that this sort of eliminates any uncertainty, if you like, and it also shows where particularly we should be looking. If anything, and just to illustrate to those who are interested in the mechanics of the project, we feel we were slightly conservative on this, working with the local experts, because we always erred on the side of conservatism. We didn't want it to be too exaggerated. So on question 7, we had an issue with: is there PRC-funded trips to the PRC for scholars in the UK? Well, that's very likely, but it's extremely difficult to extract the precise reasoning if it's not part of an academic project. So we didn't go with that one. So if the results you can see, I doubt very much you'd see exaggeration. It's sort of a basic core. Then we build on that. And also, I think we are starting to see movement in terms of academia in the UK. Last year, for example, there was a report from King's College London on managing the risks of academic engagement with China. A project like this will help in moving forward with that sort of report and that sort of question that is beginning to be asked. There are also significant issues ahead, and again, this is where I think the context will be useful, both in terms of policy making and in terms of probably reporting on future issues. Just to give an example, the sector in general obviously has a lot of issues. Dependency comes up a lot, but also there's going to be potentially individual flare points. So we would see, for example, and we've already seen to some extent, the issues of risks to Hong Kongese students from PRC students on campuses. Okay? There'll be a number of issues like this, of this nature. There's also risks to PRC students themselves. And so this will help with that. Final point, just to touch on media. This was higher than anticipated. I think it's something to delve into. And I think when we looked at this, it alludes to, again, the golden era, or so-called golden era, of UK-Chinese relations. It also, apparently, from the results, nods to non-traditional media, so for example PRC links with online influencers, and also finally the traditionally overlooked Chinese language media in the UK, which is again something that it suggests we need to be more cognizant of. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
All right, and we will have Sorin Ionita next. And Sorin Ionita is the president of the Expert Forum, a think tank based in Bucharest, working on good governance and rule of law. And he is also a consultant on public administration reform with the European Commission, Council of Europe, World Bank, and other international organizations. So please welcome Sorin to the stage here.
Okay, thank you very much. I am not Ukrainian, obviously, but in my organization we coordinated this research with Double Think for 5 countries, and these are Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, Italy, and the Netherlands. Thank you very much for that. So, and I also beg a little bit of mercy in the Q&A session because I'm not actually an Ukraine expert, but I'm trying to explain to you why do we have this spider chart and why do we have this course, which are very interesting. And my first message is Ukraine is a very interesting case, but also a fast-moving case because of obvious reasons, the war that is going on now in the country. And what you see here is just a flash picture of a fast-changing situation. Actually, on many of the 99 indicators, Ukraine looks like different countries, and the watershed moment is, of course, February this year, February 22, when the second stage of Russian aggression started. So this is my main message, fast-changing situation. And second, there are 3 dimensions where the links were and in a way still are strong between Kyiv and Beijing. And you see their economy and technology on the one hand. The other is on ideology propaganda, to refer to the clusters that our colleagues, and the third is strategic foreign policy in the capitals. And very quickly, can I have the slide? No. Okay. Very quickly, you have to know that before this war, as early as last year, for Ukraine, China was a main trade partner, both in terms of imports and exports, and I have a chart for that. China is heavily invested in agro-food industry, so actually they lease land, they invested in processing food. They are also interested in transportation. There was substantial talk about this BRE project, and some actually started to function before the COVID. You know, the rail corridors, you know, north of the Caspian and the Black Sea, the harbors are very important, both because the Chinese wanted to take the produce out of Ukraine, and we are talking here about Odessa, Mykolaiv, Mariupol harbor. So these are names with a certain resonance. And the second vector of influence, and probably it's a little bit less known, it's a legacy issue. It's a defense industry of Ukraine. Which was partly inherited from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was actually the creator of the Chinese army in terms of equipment and weapons of personnel. So again, I have a chart there, and probably we can put it after this talk, where you see that Ukraine is actually one of the main providers, or was last year. We don't know. This war is going to change many things in the economy, in the chains of value. But last year was second or third in terms of supply of defense systems to China, actually. So Chinese army relies very much for parts and maintenance services on the Ukrainian defense industry. And this is not very well known, actually. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen because the Ukrainian defense industry is very much upside down, but they will adjust in some way. The second vector of influence is propaganda. And again, we have a very interesting situation, or had a very interesting situation until February, where actually you had a big party in Ukraine. Actually, the second party in the 2019 elections was a pro-Kremlin party, openly pro-Kremlin. One of the leaders was this interesting character, Viktor Medvedchuk, a close confidante of Mr. Putin. Actually, Putin is a godfather of one of his daughters, this kind of relationship, but this guy is an oil and media mogul, actually. So he financed a party which had representation, was the second party in the Ukrainian parliament, the Rada. He had media operations, he had infiltration, he financed separatism in Donbass, and this guy was part of domestic politics until February. Then he went into hiding, he was arrested later on by the services, taken into custody, then exchanged for some prisoners from Mariupol with intermediation of Turkey. I mean, I really hope Netflix is preparing, you know, a series about these guys, because no, these are very colorful characters. Where I want to get is Ukrainians after February have banned his party, have taken down all these channels, platforms, influencers. Actually, they are illegal under the law now. So most of the Chinese propaganda, which was piggybacking on the Kremlin propaganda, is now out. It was very much present before February because they shared a lot of narratives, as we were discussing yesterday in the panels, anti-West. Everything which is Nazi blamed on the United States because those were the Nazis. Actually, the whole conspiracy about the germs and biolaboratories, which is an old mainstay of KGB and Soviet propaganda from the early 50s, actually. Secret laboratories all over the place in US, in Georgia, now in Ukraine. So it's nothing new, actually, but it served very well Xi Jinping purposes, actually, in terms of propaganda. Now, everything is out because it's banned in Ukraine. So in this way, we have different countries, you know, and the level of influence. Oh, we have here the importance of Ukrainian defense industry for supplying China. This guy is Mr. Medvedchuk. First in the good times, and then this year when he was arrested. Now he's safely into Russia because he was exchanged by Mr. Putin. And then you can, there's one more slide, so you can put the other one as well. And oh no, there's no more slides. So we have this fallout. Oh yes, we have this fallout in terms of propaganda, in terms of economy, because the war is going to change a lot of things. Most of the Chinese agro-investments are in the eastern parts and the southern parts, and the agro-processing industry was in Mariupol. So does it ring a bell, Mariupol? There's nothing here. The city was annihilated, actually. And then the influence has very much been reduced. This is a very illustrative case, a very important investment that was supposed to take place. Skirizon is a Chinese company which wanted to buy Motor Sich, which is a very important defense industry enterprise. Soviet legacy again, but the Ukrainians developed it further. It is very important. It was located in Zaporizhia. Now we don't know where it is, and they produce helicopter engines, rocket engines. Probably they diversified into drones. We don't know because now this production is spread around. So a few years ago, there was serious discussion and some memorandum signed with Kyiv to buy it by this Chinese company. Then the Ukrainian judiciary blocked it. Then the government moved and said, no, probably we don't want to sell it. This year, very recently, Zelensky said finally, no, we don't sell it. And they nationalize it, actually. The Chinese partner is very displeased, so to speak. In October, there were arrests by the Ukrainian intelligence services of the CEO of the Ukrainian company for spying and for disclosing industrial secrets to Russia and probably to China as well. And this is where the situation is now. And you see this page from Global Times, the Chinese daily, from November, which illustrates very well the position of the probably Chinese authorities. They are not very happy at all with this nationalization. So the relations are in flux. And now they are going very much down. However, and this is my last point, in spite of this fallout, in diplomacy, in politics, in propaganda, in economy and trade, there still, we can see right now a very cautious diplomatic ballet between President Zelensky and Xi Jinping. On the one hand, obviously Zelensky doesn't want to annoy Xi Jinping very much because they don't want to push them further towards Putin. It was clear this year. This is how we explain, they still keep a lot of memoranda which are signed years ago. This is how we explain the vote at the United Nations on the Xinjiang issue, right, where Ukraine abstained. And on the other hand, There are declarations from Minister Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, that they can still see a role for third-party countries in the reconstruction. And this is a key word for China and probably Turkey. A sign that they still need, I mean, the need of reconstruction is so high that they still see a role. Of course, we had the Marshall Plan, UN, the European Union and the Americans, but they know, Ukrainians, that this will come with stringent tax, good governance clauses, there will be transparency, while the need is so high that they still see a role for Chinese companies to take part and probably Chinese financing to take part. The estimates for the reconstruction, the cost of reconstruction is approaching very rapidly $1 trillion, which is more than the total of BRE projects, actually, and still counting in Ukraine, right? So it's really huge, and they will need things to be done very quickly, and probably they see a role for it. And this is why, and this is my last sentence, you will continue to see this strategic ambiguity both in Kyiv and in Beijing towards Ukraine, that they want to have a further relationship which is still undefined. This is how we can explain, the scores, but keep in mind that what we see now, the spider chart, is just a flash picture. The situation is evolving rapidly, and I'm looking forward actually to the reiteration of the exercise next year and see where Ukraine goes. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Didi Kirsten Tatlow up next, and she is a senior fellow at the Asia program at the German Council of Foreign Relations in Berlin and a senior non-resident at Project Synopsis in Prague. So please welcome Didi. I can see she's waving at me.
So thank you, Ayman, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. One brief fix, if I may. I'm no longer at the German Council on Foreign Relations. I'm now at Newsweek, where I'm in the investigations team, which is a new team that's being built up. So I'm back in journalism. So Germany, yes, we're in Germany. And I think that really the thing about Germany that's important, apart from being the country itself with a large industrial base, if you like, which is globalized, heavily globalized, is also that it's in some ways the center of the European Union. There's a lot of weight here for the EU, and Germany pushes quite a, if I may say so, Germany first policy in the EU. It's quite ruthless in pushing its interests through from time to time. It's not the only country, I'm sure, to do that. And I once asked a retired diplomat, after I arrived here in 2017 from Beijing, I asked, what does China actually want from Germany? And he gave a very good answer. He said, China wants Germany to deliver Europe to China. So to me, that's really kind of guided, a lot of the way I've sort of seen it and thought about what's going on here. And there's often something said that Germany's ties with China are extensive, both wide and deep. This is also true. They are wide, they are deep, in all areas, really. There's been a huge build-up phase over the last decades, close friendship even, a lot of training, Germany's whole vocational model, for example, a vocational skills model is something that China's very interested in. What are they going to do with all those graduate students, university graduates? So, and that's a fact. The third point then really is that it is indeed, despite all that depth and breadth, it's also a fluid situation right now, as others have noted. Things are changing, shifting. Perceptions here are shifting. There's been quite a dramatic change in German terms. Things tend to move relatively slowly here. I wouldn't quite say glacial pace, but a little bit. But by German terms, things have been changing here. They've been shifting as various, often in response to changes, political changes in China, and also in response to revelations of certain kinds in politics, in economics, pressures being made public, etc. So the mood has, definitely soured quite a bit. The Chancellor currently is, and the Chancellery is pushing back against a lot of that pressure. and the government is really quite split at this point. You will know the recent Hamburg deal. Perhaps you heard of Costco acquired a stake in Hamburg in operations of one terminal in Hamburg port, and against the advice of 6 of the government's ministries, the Chancellery decided to go ahead with the deal. Shrunk, but still it happened. So that's quite a statement, I think, and will probably be figuring in the next version of the report, because that's critical infrastructure. So having said all that, just some details maybe. I wanted to point to academia, economy, and media, and also a tiny bit about military. So academia, really, really, again, deep and wide contacts. There will be more coming out about this, but we've had some recent investigations here, and they really show immense contacts between China's research ecosystem and Germany's own very extensive research ecosystem, which is not just university-based, but is based in many of these institutes here in Germany, which are really world famous. I mean, you think about the Max Planck, you think about the Fraunhofer, the Leibniz, Jülich, DESY. There are many. I mean, there are hundreds of really great institutes here. A pretty big research nation, I'd say, Germany. And for decades, connections have been building. And some of the joint projects and joint researches have been in very sensitive areas. Now that, I think, is also coming under scrutiny, and there'll be more about that. So in the academic field, there is a real issue in terms of influencing and cooperation. One thing that's very important that I wanted to highlight is economy. So you might be looking at this and going, wait, Germany, industrial sort of nation, industrial base, why is the economy score so low? That's a great question. And I think it has to do really with the way that the economic issue with Germany is very much focused on certain core companies, key companies, very, very big conglomerates. And some of that didn't really reflect in the nature of the questions that were asked, and therefore the responses that were given. And it may be that going forward in this wonderful kind of like fluid sort of iterative process that we're involved with here with this survey, with this index, is that we can perhaps think about or talk about tweaking some of the questions, perhaps to reflect more the things you need to know about certain parts of the world, because certain parts of the world will have different kinds of economy. So, for example, one of the reasons that Germany has a lower than expected economic score is because one of the questions is, for example, is more than 50% of your nation's debt owned by China? Well, no, you know. So there are sort of issues like that which are to do with the whether your answer depends on the questions that get asked, and I think that then also illustrates how this index is maybe more about being a vehicle for further granular analysis, as Pumat showed so interestingly at the beginning, rather than being a kind of a top hit score, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 like that. No, I think this is this top outward data, the score, the simple score, if you like, 19, is really just a vehicle for looking further deeper into the data. So I don't want to take up too much more time. Media, briefly, higher than one would expect. This is to do with the Chinese language media, the diaspora media, which is very little known about in Germany, but is extensive, flourishing, and is often connected through to business of all kinds. So to tourism, import, export, you name it, ties to the diplomatic system as well. So again, perhaps less than the German language media, that's lessening. There did used to be quite a lot of influence, paid advertisements, also a new type of advertisement I found, which was actually written by Xinhua journalists as a regular news piece, but the word Xinhua never appeared anywhere on it, just the names of the journalists and an address in Beijing, and that ran in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, so in FAZ, and that was a bit of a interesting one. So things like that. And then just really, really briefly at the end, military. So not too much there, but I wanted to highlight the issue of these so-called police stations that's been popping up recently. Very, very interesting. I've myself identified 5 here in Germany, and they all originate from one public security bureau in China, Li Shui. And so again, you could say very low military security nexus, that's correct, but perhaps going forward we would need to ask this question or have this question in there. Are there any, overseas police, are there any police proxies of China in your country? Is that happening? And that would probably be a really interesting question to add in there because it would up the score in that area. So I'll stop there. Any questions later on, very happy to take. Thank you.
So I'll actually have all the panelists come up on stage for the Q&A. Perfect. So I believe if you have a question, please raise your hand. We have a microphone in the back.
Oh, hi, and this is Nadia Chow with the Radio Free Asia. A question for Didi, for the overseas police station now, starting to become a topic that people pay attention. In your finding, do you see, what's their function? Local authority aware of their existence? I think something really puzzles that how it even happened. The sovereign country allow that. And another question for Sorin. I think you mentioned many interesting, development in Ukraine. Do you see that even after the war ended, there is a big incentive for Ukraine to reinforce or rebuild their relationship with China? Will they see China influence as a positive one? Thank you.
So thanks for that. On the police stations, it seems that every single head of one of these 5 that I've been able to identify so far, and considering that they all come from one place in China, one PSB in China, I assume there might be more, is also a member of the China National Peaceful Reunification Council. So and that is, of course, a core sort of United Front organization, political warfare, getting into that territory. And so I think that there's a very clear connection showing there. As to whether the local authorities know about it, I kind of doubt it quite a bit. I don't think they do, probably, because just like so much of this stuff is happening in plain sight but hidden, and that's partly the fault of the host countries because we're just not looking closely enough, and when we do see something, we don't recognize what it is. We're kind of, a bit sort of stupid in that way. Hopefully that process will start to get better. As above all, I think this has to be an awareness creation process. But I want to say, before I hand over to Ukraine, one very interesting fact that I have discovered about this these police stations here is that one guy who claims to be a volunteer at a so-called police station, a proxy police station, actually came to Germany via Ukraine. So he went to Ukraine, asked for asylum, and then didn't get it in Ukraine, and then ended up in Germany doing the same, and says he's a volunteer, and he is currently being investigated by the Dutch and the German police for harassment.
Yes, if I can follow up just a little bit on these secret police station things. For example, in Romania, it's just broken out 2 days ago that there is such a case. We didn't know about it when we calculated. We'll factor in it next year. It's not exactly a secret police station, but it's a memorandum signed by some stupid guys from a local government in Romania, so a rural local government, but near Bucharest, with the Nantong police, and the Ministry of Security in Beijing, and obviously they didn't know what they were signing. It was a memorandum of cooperation where the stupid guys from the mayor, actually, of commune, he was asking for better equipment from China to install on the streets, because they always ask for money. And what is interesting is this commune is where near Bucharest, is where most of the Chinese diaspora is concentrated in Romania. There's a big shopping mall, real estate project, and they live there. We have a study on this diaspora. It's very diverse in terms of provenance from China, dialects. A lot of them are Christian and just came to Europe, to practice their faith. And obviously the interest of the Chinese part in this memorandum is to keep an eye on them. So not primarily on Romanian citizens, but on diaspora. And to infiltrate them because the embassy cannot. They are very cool towards the embassy, so they try to find all ways. So you will not find, probably, and this is a situation in many countries, I guess, countries of second importance for China, like Romania, where they don't invest a lot of effort. It's below the radar, it's not big BRE projects, it's not big political relations with the government, but they come at a local level, and they try, to create these small links with local elites, to pursue their interests. And even if they don't have a police section with Chinese personnel, they try to use the local police, which is not national police in Romania, so local civil servants, to do their job, actually, which is even more crazy, if you ask me. And about Ukraine, well, you asked me to forecast where the relation will go after the war, stops. There are a lot of ifs and buts, and it's really difficult to make such a prediction. But as I said, even now, we see this attempt from Kyiv actually to keep a reasonable relationship with Beijing, because first, they don't want to antagonize Xi Jinping very much, to start him to really help Russia, which he didn't so far. It was just rhetoric. And second, they know they will need these big Chinese companies and the Silk Road projects in transportation, because these are advantageous, actually. And some of them even make economic sense, like these railways to bring wares into Central Europe. What's going to be, how's going to play out, what's going to be the pressure from the West, actually, to cut the links. Anyway, I don't see any continuation of the smart city, Huawei type of investments in Ukraine, because they were on the list before. They were very big. Even this summer, they were still discussing about this memoranda. I think these are dead. I mean, I don't see 5G in Ukraine after the war with Chinese partners. No way, no way. But normal transport, economic trade relationship without strategic implications. So no key infrastructure, but normal trade. Why not? What's going to happen with the defense industry is a very interesting question, but it depends very much on the result of the war.
Okay, so just for our participants here. Any questions about the methodology? We do ask that you ask offline or contact myself or David, just as those are questions with very, very long answers, and we want to make sure we get to all our questions. We do have one question online.
Yeah, this is from Yutong Su, with a reporter for Radio Free Asia. And he or she is talking about a case of a former EU diplomat called Gerhard Sabatil, who also lobbied for Huawei in European political circles and then founded an organization called China Bridge with a lot of funds coming from Chinese companies. Yutong knows that China's infiltration of overseas political circles is also in the research field of Didi, as well as other experts. And so they'd like to ask, how serious is the situation of the CCP's infiltration of political circles or former politicians in Germany and EU countries? And are the laws against the agents of the CCP in Germany and EU weaker than the laws in the United States?
So thank you. China Bridge and Sabatil are kind of two different issues. So Gerhard Sabatil is a former EU diplomat who was the Domestic Security Service raided his home and office in Berlin just over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, on suspicion of sort of basically going in the direction of espionage suspicions. So now nothing came of that, but there are questions bubbling, shall we say, and it's probably good if I don't say too much in public. There was a Huawei connection. There was lobbying going on for that company and various other things. He then got a lot of support and backing from politicians down in Bavaria, one of whom had a really bright idea not long ago to build a high-speed rail from Berlin to Moscow. Nothing happened with that one. Thank goodness, when you consider everything that's going on. So like we need that like a hole in the head. But with the China Bridge, or China-Brücke as it's called, is a real sort of thing that's continuing now. I think it's a absolute sign of political capture of the elite in Germany by the CCP. It was established by a former interior minister who is a CSU politician. That's the Bavarian sister party of the CDU, which is Angela Merkel's party. And it's basically a very high-level business, technology, politics, networking group that meets, I believe, once a month or twice a month in a Chinese restaurant, a very posh one in the Adlon Hotel in Berlin. So I'm just sort of, telling you the story here. And they push ties in all areas. So what's really important about them was that they were the Chinese partner when they launched, I think in 2019, was a member of the Politburo, very, very senior. And so it really wasn't an equal relationship, if you like, because the German politician, Hans-Peter Friedrich, was a deputy, if I get this right, he was a deputy sort of president or chairperson of the Bundestag, and there are several. And in that capacity, his so-called opposite number was Mr. Wang in Beijing, who was also, I think at the time, a deputy president of the NPC, but also on the Politburo, and a major figure in the propaganda system, has a long history working those jobs. So while on paper it seemed like a parallel, and that would be how things often work in diplomacy, your opposite number, etc. In reality, there was no equivalence whatsoever. And that's a very typical sort of thing that you will see. So yeah, the China-Brücke is going strong. And it is an example, an excellent example of elite capture, I think.
We'll take an in-person question next. Do we have any other?
Здравствуйте, дамы и господа. Я гражданка Казахстана. Слава Украине. Если вам не трудно с Украины, вы можете перевести. Я по бизнесу поехала в Восточный Туркестан, и меня задержали. Полиция, я по национальности уйгурка, и была 1,5 года в концлагере. Вышла недавно. И там от 14 до 80 лет. Дети маленькие, все в кандалах. Я хотела попросить, как можно лагеря закрыть, концлагеря? Что вы можете сделать для уйгуров, которые в Восточном Туркестане? Там кровью плачут. И я была там. И по воле судьбы я вышла оттуда. Спасибо.
I will translate. This is a question to everyone in the panel. She is a camp survivor. She's a citizen from Kazakhstan, but of Uyghur ethnicity. And she was, as she testified yesterday, also interned in the camp and was able to leave after a lot of various tortures because she's a citizen of Kazakhstan. So I think it's a question to the entire panel if there's anything you could do to help with this situation. How can you help?
Thank you for the question, actually, and it is an important issue right in the middle of these discussions. I think what we can do is to keep the issue vivid and to have it more clear. Although it was included among the indicators, so we will keep it among the indicators for the next iteration. And just to pay attention to it, and it's a very good test case for how countries position themselves. So for the foreign policy dimension, it is very important how they position themselves when a vote comes in the UN bodies, or how they define their relationship with Beijing in light of the treatment of minorities. And this is crucial. It's not just the Uyghur minority, but of course it's one of the most dramatic cases of mistreatment of minorities by the PRC, actually.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your testimony. I can't add too much to that. I just want to say that I think we take part in a program like this, in this index. Sometimes it can feel a little cold and sterile, but we do need that data, that information, and it helps. I think what we can do is remember and speak to and learn from people like you, because it ensures that we retain a human element, and that is absolutely vital. We try to do that, and we talk to one another, and we have other experts, and we combine, and where possible, we try to include direct testimony, and that's absolutely crucial. That will certainly shape going forward, and I'm sure we will, and as we have done already, try to continue and improve and widen the people we talk to, and then include a wider range of experiences. Thank you kindly.
Thank you for your question. Pakistan champions itself for the Muslim cause around the world, whether it is Palestinians or Kashmiris or Chechens, but it doesn't speak up for your community. Questions have been asked. Pakistani leaders, when they give interviews internationally, they are often asked about it, that how come you can turn a blind eye to this? They're your next door neighbors. In fact, in northern Pakistan, in Gilgit-Baltistan, there are descendants of your community who are married there, who are settled there. So I wouldn't expect much from the Pakistani government, because in Pakistan we don't treat our minorities, religious minorities, very well. So Pakistan can't really raise it with the People's Republic of China. But because Pakistan is a parliamentary democracy and there is media, as journalists, questions have been asked, and they will be asked, whether the government likes it or not. I think in our own limited capacity, that's what we can do.
Yeah, so thanks again for the question, and still thanks for your courage, your testimony. And I believe in that because China is really good that there are like 3 kinds of warfare that China really needs to, really tries to initiate. It's like psychological warfare and public opinion warfare and legal warfare. And what happens to especially Central Asia is the legal warfare. Because according to our data, the law enforcement is highly influenced in Central Asia. And one of the reasons why is that they're using this kind of law enforcement as a measure to arrest someone, even not in their own country, right? And they're even arresting Uyghurs in Japan. And also, it's not just Uyghurs, it's like the national security law there in Hong Kong. They're using this kind of like law enforcement to extend their influence operation. And I think because we do not pay enough attention, people always pay attention on disinformation, but it's not just disinformation. They're using the law as a measure to do this kind of stuff. And what we should do is that we're using this kind of index to raise the public awareness and let people understand this is something that we should counter. And that's one thing. And the other thing is that they're using lots of like bots and trolls, especially on YouTube channels, and creating all this video saying that there's nothing happened there in East Turkestan, nothing happened there in Hong Kong. And because all these for private and social media platforms, they're not paying the true attention on all these like trolls or channels on YouTube. And let's say, I think it's previously like a month ago when we create like a new accounts on YouTube and just click one video like created by CCP. And then we got 80% of the videos talking about how great East Turkestan right now it is. And there's nothing happening there. And that's the disinformation warfare we're facing off. So, I mean, because I focus more on information warfare, but what I could do is that we still using this kind of index and using the power we have and raise the awareness and let the people know what they're doing right now.
You know, I also want to echo what everyone else has said, and thank you deeply for your testimony. I think that with Germany, for example, we see a very cynical attitude in business. German companies are running factories in the Uyghur regions. Some very prominent German businessmen have even denied there are problems or they don't know anything about problems. This was quite recently. The head of VW, Volkswagen, he's gone now. But and we have an ever-deepening industrial cooperation between Germany and China. BASF is opening a $10 billion chemical plant in Zhanjiang in Guangdong province, which is the headquarters of the South China Fleet. So if there's any trouble in the South China Sea, which China claims and has militarized, that's probably where most of the fighters will come from. Same port, very close by. So these are really deeply serious and deeply concerning issues. I think that one thing with the index that we hope to do is to establish beyond any doubt, to help establish beyond any doubt the facts of the situation. And that's why it's so important to keep doing this work, because you get a lot of pushback along the lines of, there's nothing happening, it's all fine, and we hear it every day in terms of influence or, abuses. And this is a way to demonstrate the reach of the CCP into the world and to show how it's happening and that it's really happening. And if you start just denying it, then you're kind of crazy at that point, I mean, you almost start to stray into the territory of, we've got the whole Holocaust denial issue here in Germany. That's a crime here. So we'll see where this goes. But I want to say really, really briefly that some years ago, Germany and Bavaria again deported a Uyghur man back to China. He disappeared after that. And it was an administrative error, and it was deeply appalling. But after that, they stopped, and there was reaction. It hasn't happened since. They've become quite good at extradition to Hong Kong was frozen the minute after that state security law was passed in Hong Kong in June 2020. They are taking in asylum seekers. People from the Uyghur regions tend to get asylum. It's over 90%, 97 or something percent, I think, I might not have the figure quite right, are being granted asylum when they seek it here. That doesn't solve the problem. But these are the very small things, perhaps, that happen around the edges that help.
She would like to add something, if possible.
Да, вы попросили доказательства. У меня есть письмо, которое, когда меня задержали, они дали домой в Казахстан отправили письмо, что я террорист, террористический акт хотела совершать. Но когда я была в концлагере, они мне фамилию, имя поменяли и дали китайский паспорт. И мои дети, когда в ООН написали письмо, и они потом отпустили меня, сказали, что у меня никакой вины нету, суда ничего не было. Но за 1,5 года я преследовалась насилию. После этого как мне жить? Вы мне дайте ответ. Мне 58 лет. Мне с психикой ненормально, и мне что делать?
She would just like to say that, when she was detained, actually, as a Kazakhstan citizen, and she was visiting China for regular business, they actually accused her, and she has official paper that, according to a Chinese court, she was committing acts of terrorism. And that what is really appalling and also ridiculous is that her name was changed, and she was actually given a Chinese ID number as if she were a Chinese citizen, which she never was, because she's, fourth generation Uyghur from Kazakhstan. So she just wanted to say that if you need facts for your research, she's always willing to provide it. Yes, so you can always talk to her. Thank you.
Я знаю концлагеря, у меня 2 концлагеря было. Потом я была в больнице, где органы берут. Я была там, где уколы ставят.
She has all the testimonies about organ trafficking, about rape, and about torture. So if you need proof, she's always willing to provide it. Thank you. Thank you. Ahmed.
And do we have any more questions before we wrap up the launch of our China Index? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And do we have one more? Oh, sorry.
Yes, we have one more question from our online participant, and that is just questioning whether we can include in the future index some of the efforts by the PRC to beyond censorship, is actually using discourse, the power of discourse through cultural presentation, like museums, including Taiwan and Hong Kong and Tibet, whether we can, perhaps a question for Puma, whether this could be included in a future index, or if he's thought about that.
I think it's a great question, because we put like all the cultural events, whether like cultural related questions in the domain of society, but we only have like 11 indicators for that society part. So that's why some sort of maybe education part or entertainment, some of them could not be all included in the questionnaire. That's number one. And number two is that sometimes certain strategy only apply to certain countries. So if that is not general enough, we didn't include that in our index. Otherwise, we'll just like put several countries on the top because they have some sort of that questions. And then, but I mean, we already have the group meeting for all the regional partners like a few days ago, and we may add more new indicators, and we're going to modify some of the indicators that we might have. So I think that might be something will be considered. I mean, especially, for example, we talked about climate change, and then whether there's any relationship between the Chinese policy and climate change might also be included in this kind of domain. So that's one thing. And the last thing I want to talk about is that I saw also the online discussion. People talk about the methodology part, like who answered the question, like who reviewed the questions. So I mean, that's basically already on our website. So I won't talk into the details, but it's more about the regional partners. We'll try to recruit the local experts. I mean, in each country, and when the local experts answer the question, and sometimes regional partners, they are local experts, right? And then they will have another local experts to review the question. So that is the case. It's pretty much like a peer review. And people might question that will be 2, will be 3, would be enough. And the thing is that even we have like 5, we can have 5 local experts in that country, maybe only 2 of them qualified for answer that. And maybe only like 80% of them already received the fundings from China. So there's a limit to answer all these questions and review all these questions. That's our limit. So we'll try to help more, investigative journalists or any like scholars to have this ability to answer or to review the question. And also, we always keep our question related to facts. So it's not about opinion. So for example, we ask, how many cats are there here, maybe down street over there? That's a factual question. And then you can check the websites, and maybe the government reports talk about how many cats are there. But we don't ask whether these cats are cute or not. right? I mean, they might be cute. I mean, all cats are cute, but still, that's not the questions we ask. So we try to limit this kind of bias, I mean, in our questionnaire. So that's the basic response to the methodology part.
Okay, and with that, that brings us to the end of our China Index 2022 launch. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And another reminder that if you have any further questions or media queries, you can contact myself or David Green, who's in the back waving. All right, thank you everyone.